So I think you can't have your cake and eat it at the same time. And that seems to be what they want. And it seems to be their ongoing complaint.
Well, Jonathan, Happy New Year. And, we're already kicking off 2023 with a bang with the royal family, kicking off with this double interview that Prince Harry is doing with Anderson Cooper and ITV. We just saw a couple clips that they've released, but what do you make of what he's had to say thus far?
On the one hand, more of the same. Yeah. And on the other hand, wow, it's shocking stuff. I mean, it seems to me like he's acknowledging there's no way back from this. Yeah. So in those interviews, both of the tiny clips we've seen so far, and of course we'll await the full interviews, but we've seen that he said he wants his brother back, he wants his father back. He's not talking about wanting the institution back, he says, but wants his family back. Yeah. I think that seems a bit rich, to be honest, because Meghan and Harry have done everything they could to alienate themselves from their family. I think they've really fought quite hard to attack the family. And I'm not just talking about the royal family, they've done it both ways. So when we think about how they've treated Meghan's family as well, what we know is that her father was absolutely cut off for the terrible crime of posing for a few photographs, which seems to be what they've done ever since themselves. And bearing that in mind, I don't think he did anything particularly damaging to them from what we know. And yet she's refused to speak to him, refused to see him, didn't invite him to her wedding, hasn't really shown, as far as we know, much interest or contact when he suffered from a heart attack, a stroke, and they're so close to him. They say that he hasn't even met his own grandchildren by her. So I think that for him to say what he has in this interview about the royal family and how distant they feel doesn't really ring true when you think about their general attitude towards their families on both sides. And I think that also what they say, what Harry says in this interview, is that the palace briefed against him and leaked things. That's exactly what they seem to have done, if you ask me, with her family. They've briefed against the Markles. Even in that Netflix series, they really slagged off the Markle family quite terribly. And that seems to be exactly what they're complaining about in terms of the royal family doing to them. So I think that even if it's true what they're complaining about, they don't really have a leg to stand on, do they?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We had the CBS interview, we had the Netflix docuseries, we have the podcast, we have the book coming out. I mean, how many times are we going to kind of rehash the same thing over and over again? I know that we've talked about this, but what do you think Harry's endgame is? Because if you want to reconcile things with your brother and your father, this doesn't seem to be the way.
Well, it's endless and it's over and over and repeated because they haven't got much else. And I think they're proving that. I think the other thing that the couple want to market themselves as is leaders, thought leaders, great thinkers. But it's nonsense. I don't think anyone really is falling from that. I mean, just in this clip of this interview, Harry says that there comes a point where silence is betrayal. It sounds very grand. That's because it's stolen from Martin Luther King Jr. He was talking about the war in Vietnam and US military action and how US citizens might want to speak out against it, but it's very difficult to do so. Not about whether or not the palace should have issued a press release about a petty spat to do with bridesmaid dresses. So I think the point is that they're very grand about their own problems, which may feel very real to them. But really, they're not great thinkers, they're not great philosophers, they're not even psychologists, though I think they'd like to have a big amount to say on the matter of mental health and mental illness. And in want of anything like that, in want of any actual quality material they can contribute to the world, what they're left with is gossip about the royal family. But we've heard almost every allegation they make many, many times before. Mm-hmm. And I think that means that it's wearing quite thin. That said, I'm sure this book will do fantastic sales at some point. I'm sure that people will be watching these two interviews, the ITV one and of course the 60 Minutes. So it's obviously working for them. And that leads me to the answer to your question, which is, what do they want from all this? Money. They're getting paid sackloads of cash for slagging off their families, for complaining about the royal family, for what some people have called untruths, or the late Queen called recollections varying. They're just getting paid tons and tons and tons of money for it. And I think they're going to carry on doing it as long as they are being paid that.
Right. What did you make of Harry saying, that the royal family's motto is never complain, never explain, but that's pretty much all they do behind the scenes. And, we've always talked about the royal family's relationship with the media. But is it true that that's kind of how Buckingham Palace works? They'll leak these stories to the press and, and not put it on record, but it's all kind of off record reporting.
I think Harry doesn't like never complain, never explain, because their motto seems to be always complain, always explain, even if nobody really wants to hear it. And it's the direct opposite of that palace idea. But I think underlying all of that, it's not just a disagreement or a clash of cultures with the palace. I think in a way, it's actually a complete failure of understanding Meghan's part, at any rate, of Britishness. The British believe traditionally in the stiff upper lip. Meghan and Harry are all about that quivering bottom lip, the boo-hoo, crying, woe is me, constant bearing of their souls. It is the direct opposite of not just the royal family, but of what is traditionally seen as British. Obviously, in our era, we're a bit more in tune with sharing our problems and our woes, and a problem shared is a problem halved. But there's a limit to everything. And I think in a world where people are going through very real problems, experiencing real difficulties, whether or not they can afford to heat their homes and feed their children at the same time, things like that, I think hearing these two multi-millionaires complaining about the same stuff over and over, none of it's particularly bad. It's just tiresome. In terms of the royal family, I don't think it is fair either, watching from the outside anyway, to say that that's what happened. I mean, if you think about how they did react to all these things, they did always include them, even after some of the worst complaints and controversies started by Harry and Meghan. They were invited to the Jubilee celebrations. They were also by chance in the UK during the Queen's funeral and were included in that in a very fulsome way. So it's not like the family has actually cut them off in that sense. They've always included them as family members, as they should do probably. But they haven't included them as working royals because they chose not to be working royals. So I think you can't have your cake and eat it at the same time. And that seems to be what they want. And it seems to be their ongoing complaint.
For more news, content, and exclusive interviews, make sure to hit the sub, like, and bell button down below and visit usmagazine.com.